Hey there, welcome to Takeaway with Sam Oches, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief here at NRN, and this is the show where I give you an all-access pass to the restaurant industry's most influential decision makers. This week, I'm talking with Scott Snyder, the CEO of Badass Coffee of Hawaii. This 32-unit chain has been around since 1989, but Scott was part of a group that acquired it back in 2019, and they've spent the last 4 years figuring out how Badass Coffee can embrace its quirky and evocative branding and deliver the experience of aloha to its guests in and out of its shops. A big piece of that puzzle is Badass Coffee's omnichannel sales strategy that sees it investing in retail and merchandise. And Scott joined the podcast to talk about how shirts, hats, and coffee mugs adorned with the brand's winking donkey logo have become critical to Badass Coffee's experience as its product and its store design. In this conversation, you'll learn more about why the experience your restaurant provides should be authentic to your brand, how merchandise is an underrated way to drive sales without increasing labor, and how an e-commerce strategy can help bring your customers into the stores from day one. Jumping now into my interview with Scott Snyder, the CEO of Badass Coffee of Hawaii. Also, don't forget to stick around after my interview as I will share my 6 takeaways from this discussion, actionable insights that you can take with you on the go. Okay, I'm here with Scott Snyder, the CEO of Badass Coffee of Hawaii. Scott, good morning. Thanks for joining the podcast today.
Aloha, Sam.
Aloha. You must have to say that all the time. Is that in your contract? You have to say aloha? Is that part of the deal?
It's not in my contract, but honestly, I've been doing it so long now that's it's second nature. So
fair enough. You know, it's better than hello and good morning. So, Scott, tell us, for those who are not familiar with Badass Coffee of Hawaii, what's this brand all about?
Badass Coffee of Hawaii is a really interesting brand, one that I actually stumbled on about 28 years ago. On the big island of Hawaii, and I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would, 33 years later, actually be the CEO for the company. It's a brand that started in the Big Island in 1989 as a way for locals to enjoy some of the fruits of their labor. The brand name, which was anchored in the legend of how they used to use the donkeys to bring the coffee down the steep volcanic hillsides in Kona, really took off and became had very quick success in Hawaii. The brand grew, was bought in 1995 and began franchising out of Salt Lake City. The brand fell on hard times in 1995 fell on hard times in about 2008 during the last recession and really never recovered. That's where I came in and was brought in 2017 to help them understand how to kind of get back on track. The result of that actually was an opportunity to buy the assets of the company. And so we formed Royal Aloha Coffee Company in 2019, purchased the assets of the brand and relaunched the brand with a new focus on its Hawaiian heritage, on its Hawaiian coffee expertise, and had a lot of fun with that badass donkey, and really kind of fueling the inner badass in all of us. And so we relaunched the brand in 2020, just as COVID hit, which was an entertaining time. But since then, I've had tremendous success. We just opened our 32nd store over the last weekend. We started with about 18 stores. We opened up our 32nd store last weekend. We've got 4 more store openings planned here within the next month, and hope to be close to about 40 stores by the end of the year, and another 120 in the pipeline. So having a lot of fun, having a lot of growth, and really enjoying the rebirth of an iconic kind of cult-like following brand.
Yeah, that's exciting, and congratulations on the success. You mentioned obviously going through COVID, and you mentioned the brand hitting hard times in 2008, which of course I'm assuming was related to the recession. Now, when I think of coffee, though, I think sort of like a recession-proof, COVID-proof kind of category.
Uh-huh.
You know, clearly there are all sorts of other factors at play, I'm sure, in 2008. But as far as you see the positioning of this brand, it feels like coffee's kind of a safe bet when to go through the highs and lows of things. Is that true? I mean, have you found that Badass Coffee has already survived some of these downturns and can continue to do that?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. I think we really only need to look back as far as 2020, right? With COVID, I mean, who are the big winners in during COVID for the restaurant space? I think it was coffee and pizza and third party delivery, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think for this brand in 2008, it was more about the lack of an infrastructure that had sustainable success for their franchisees. But, I agree with you. I think, coffee as a category is the ultimate habit brand, right? It's the ultimate habit category. You think of the number of times you interact with coffee. Most people interact with coffee per day, whether it's coffee in the morning at home and maybe on your way into work, whether that's at the train station or your drive through on the way to the work. And of course, we've got coffee in the break room and a little pick me up after lunch. And so there really is that opportunity for 5 or 6 interactions per day with coffee. And that bodes well for the category. So whether you're in the retail coffee business or you're in the coffee shop business, franchise or corporate or otherwise, coffee is a really good category.
Sure. And you're not the only one to realize that. Of course, it's becoming a crowded category, I guess you could say. And you mentioned, coffee making it through COVID. There's been a little bit of a boom of coffee concepts coming out of COVID. Very drive-through oriented, as I'm sure you are following with some of your competitors.
Yep.
For Badass Coffee, what's the primary operations model? Is this one of those more leaning towards the Starbucks, come and have a third place, sit and stay a while, or do you see this as being sort of that providing the convenient, efficient coffee opportunity for the customer's day?
I have a little bit different opinion on that. I think everyone had kind of a knee jerk reaction during COVID and said, the days of the cafe are dead,
Hmm.
and everything's just going to be, pick up, order ahead, and drive through. And certainly, we recognize that and have models that are built specifically for that purpose. Our approach is really more of a location specific. I think there are locations where a drive through with no cafe, maybe not even a walk up window, completely makes sense because it's purely based on convenience. At the same time, coffee shops generally become kind of the center of the universe. They become that focal point within a community where people gather and people meet, and we honor that. I think part of our brand and what distinguishes our brand from other concepts is not only our coffee, not only our name, not only merchandise and things we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but also the environment. We are absolutely an experiential brand. When you walk into a Badass Coffee, not only are you going to get a big aloha from someone behind the counter, but it looks and feels different, right? It's warm and colorful. It's a great place to chill, right? So you work hard, gives you a great place to chill hard. So I would say it's less about, for us anyway, our philosophy is more about having the right store type for the location than it is about going all down one path or all down the other path. We really do explore both, and we look at the location and look at what's appropriate for that particular location.
And is that just kind of up to the franchisee? How do you make these decisions about what kind of locations to pursue?
Well, we use a lot of data, Sam. We use a lot of data in terms of traffic and where people are coming from. We use a lot of AI data in terms of, beyond the obvious demographics. We look at where people are coming from and where they came from prior to that location and where they're going to from that location. And so that helps us to form a lot of our decisions. As you know, we also have a lot of stores that are in what I would call destination locations, to where a high percentage of that store's traffic is seasonal. It's transient, right? It's a different group from week to week based on if people are there for vacation or not. So we take into account all that data as well. But ultimately, it's really our decision For the franchisee, whether we would allow, for instance, if we were to allow a drive-through only in a location that has high concentration of foot traffic, that wouldn't be a very smart decision, and really not in the best interest of the franchisee. So ultimately, we're partners with that franchisee. We try to look at all the data that's available, and honestly, we really haven't had any issues yet where we're banging heads over a difference of opinion. The data generally shows and leads us down the path as to what's the right model for the location.
So you mentioned that word experiential, and I'm curious what that means for Badass Coffee. What is the experience you hope to create for the customers, and as they move through the space, walk me through that. What is that experience that they're kind of immersing themselves in?
It's a great question. I think if you kind of look at the landscape, and there's obviously exceptions to the statement I'm about to make, but I think when you look through the landscape of what we would consider for most coffee shops, whether those are national brands or regional brands, obviously one-off independents are a completely different story, but they kind of fall into two categories in terms of what that experience looks like. One is kind of the dark industrial or dark wood, almost a library or kind of a study feel, or a dark industrial with dark woods and dark metals. And the other end of that spectrum is really the almost white surgical suite, sort of sterile, a lot of stainless steel, a lot of white counters and cabinets and black handles and things like that. Very stark. When you walk into a Badass Coffee, I mean, we designed it with purpose in mind. Tim Gervin, Gervin Agency out of Seattle, was someone that we engaged with very early in this process, immediately actually after acquiring the assets, and together with our team, I mean, we really took a look at what the brand was before, which was really more of a kind of a commercial interpretation of what that Hawaiian experience would be, almost something that you would see in a retro poster or a postcard, and we really wanted to move beyond that, to move to something that was authentic. Basically, the experience that we wanted to create, Sam, was if you've been to Hawaii before or you're from Hawaii, there are going to be subtle cues in terms of the artwork, in terms of the finishes, in terms of the music that's playing, that will take you back, that will be an authentic reminder of what's so great about the Hawaiian Islands, right? If you've never been to Hawaii before, we wanted to create an experience that gave you an idea of what that might be like. So if you feel like you need to escape the everyday and go to a place that's warm and lush and colorful and friendly and relaxing, Badass Coffee is that experience. And so when you walk in, you see natural hardwoods, you see, blues and greens, which represent, water and land. You have subtle reminders of a diamond pattern, which is it flows through all of our stores and into our merchandise, and those are reminders of tribal bands and of body art that's common in Hawaiian culture. The music that plays is a custom and curated track of music that runs the gamut of traditional Hawaiian music to surfer influence to kind of beach and coastal music. And so again, it begins with what you see and what you experience, but it follows in terms of what you hear, how you're greeted by the staff as you get closer to the counter. Well, the first thing you see when you walk in the door is you see a beautiful piece of art. It's a mural wall of an authentic piece of Hawaiian art that we purchased. We've blown that up into a mural, and that's where we feature the legend that tells the story of the Badass ones. But as you move through the store and you move closer to ordering, you're going to pass the merchandise area, which is important because one of the things that really differentiates this brand is that third revenue stream, which is, beyond just the retail coffee beans. This is a brand It's kind of a badge of honor. It's a brand that people want to, identify themselves with, as there's a little badass in all of us, and so the ability to wear a badass hat or to walk around with a badass mug in your office or at home is pretty cool. So to have that experience as you're getting ready to walk up, hopefully the line's not too long, but it does give you some time to look to your right and to see all the opportunities. If our stores are doing a great job, they're sampling new coffees at the counter, right? Which then you can reference back over and potentially buy that bag of coffee and get something off your drink today. So it really is a great experience. One of the most interesting things that I find, Sam, I think, back to your earlier question, with third party delivery, and everyone has to have an online app, and order ahead is such a big part of the coffee space. One of the interesting trends that I just personally have observed in stores is the number of people who still use the order ahead app to make sure that their drink is there when they're ready, and they come in and they get it. You expect them to turn right around and walk out because they're in a hurry, but they get their drink and they turn around, and you can almost see kind of a smile on their face, and then they find their place where they want to sit down and enjoy it. So we really do, it really was the intention to create more of an authentic, relaxing experience, whether you choose to enjoy it or not.
So I want to spend a moment on the branding element of this, because there's two parts of the branding here that I think are important to explore. And the first part is the Hawaii aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of brands are really rooted in place quite like I think you guys are. I mean, you see that, with a little bit with some concepts, but you guys obviously are really leaning into that Hawaiian aspect of it. But then there's sort of the provocative nature of your brand too, badass coffee, which is, as you say, you mentioned the merchandise, which we're going to get into. When you wear something that says badass, like people wear that as something they want to be seen as sort of provocative, right? So just first starting with that first part of the branding, the Hawaiian aspect of it. You did a great job explaining how that kind of comes to life in the store, but why is the Hawaii element of it so critical to badass coffee? Why is that something you guys have really kind of planted your flag in representing?
Great question. I think can't take credit for that, right? Someone thought of that in the beginning, and while the original intention is different than the intention now, I think the common theme there, Sam, is Hawaii is a place that, again, whether you've been there or not, it's a place that we all have a very clear image of being a very cool, exotic, desirable place. In the coffee world, it is a double-edged sword in that Hawaiian coffee is absolutely a premium product coffee, and what Badass Coffee is doing with that is really really kind of creating a new model to show that you can have a premium product as the highlighted showcase product in a franchise system. I don't believe that that's really been done in the coffee space before. When we look at the coffee world, there's kind of second wave, which are all the big national brands that we know, and then the third wave that really focus on that higher quality, really craft roasting. And Badass Coffee is really kind of 2.5 wave. We market, and our menu is like those second wave, but the coffee we buy and the way that we roast it is more akin to what the third wave, coffee shops are doing. So for us, Hawaii is a differentiator. The coffee itself is a huge differentiator, and so we lean into that because we think it's desirable for people. It's one of the many differentiators. I've worked with probably 120 different brands in my career up to beginning to work with Badass Coffee and then becoming an owner of Badass Coffee. And I've really rarely seen a brand that has so many unique and ownable truths that separate it from everyone else in the field. Hawaii's a big one. It's enjoyable. It's a place we all want to be, or wish that we could be, and our goal there is to provide that comprehensive experience that again, whether it's the store experience or the coffee itself, I think we've earned over the last several years. We worked very hard with the Hawaii coffee growers. So through the Hawaii Coffee Association, the Maui Coffee Association, we've developed, this brand had longstanding relationships, 30-year-old relationships with the coffee growers that they were buying from. But we've taken that one step further, and we've become much more involved. And there's a story to tell. There's an education to tell. This isn't coffee from Colombia or Brazil or Mexico, where it's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. We're talking tens and maybe hundreds of acres, which is part of the reason why it's so rare, which is part of the reason why it's so expensive. And so it's a very interesting story to tell, and we're proud to be a part of that.
Are there limitations to that at all? I mean, when you think about like Hawaii, it could be easy to like really lean into ukuleles and leis, and there's a kind of too far on the Hawaii that maybe might push some people away. Do you find limitations with that branding?
I think this is just my personal opinion, but I think if you look back at how the brand was presented prior to our ownership, the design, it leaned very hard into it, almost to the point to where it was beyond commercialized view of what Hawaii is, and I think that cheapens it a little bit, right? So the artwork, for instance, the artwork in the stores is vintage, vintage photography of surfing, vintage photography of harvesting coffee. It's vintage photography of the use of donkeys, right? I mean, it's just, again, a lot of black and white, a lot of kind of hearkening back to the roots, right? How Hawaii became what Hawaii is today. And so, yeah, we're very sensitive of that. There are a lot of sensitivities, even on the islands in terms of how the mainlanders, right, use Hawaiian terms, right? And so we have kind of a balancing act there, right? We want to bring that forward so we can educate and introduce the other 49 states and the rest of the world to what is so great and so unique about Hawaii as a place and about the coffee that it produces, because there's a great story to tell. But you have to do that in kind of a balancing act in a way that's relatable to the rest of us, and not offensive to the residents of Hawaii.
Yeah, of course. So, speaking of kind of being offensive, some might see a badass coffee as the branding as being maybe offensive, maybe provocative. Does that ever become a barrier for you guys? And how is that part of the branding kind of critical to the success of it?
The donkey, the ass, is an important part of coffee history in Hawaii. When the missionaries came to the Big Island in the early 1800s, they brought with them a couple things. They brought Bibles because they were converting the indigenous people to Christianity. They also brought skills, and they were the ones that actually brought the farming of coffee to Hawaii. And actually, the farm that we still buy our Kona coffee from today, Greenwell Farms, was not only the first coffee farm on Kona, but the first coffee farm in all the islands. And the missionaries, the Greenwells, brought that skill and that practice of growing coffee. They also brought with them asses that they used to bring the coffee down, right? Steep volcanic slopes, rugged, jagged, not good for horses, not good for people in terms of carrying those heavy beans down. And so, and if you think about it, right, the word ass, appears in the King James Bible 76 times. You won't find the word donkey anywhere. And so they refer to those animals as asses. And so, so for the indigenous people, they call them the badass ones because they made so much noise, but they were stubborn, they were reliable, they were strong. But, pardon the pun, but they were kind of a pain in the ass at times, right? So that's where it started from. And honestly, when we acquired the assets of the brand and we did our own branding exercise, that was a big question for me. That was badass coffee of Hawaii. And personally, to your last question, I almost wondered if that should have all been flipped. Should Hawaii be the focus, coffee be second, and badass be third? And what we really came out of that branding summit was a full-on embrace of the dual meaning of badass. One of the challenges that we saw with the brand when I came in as a consultant was there was no leadership from the brand itself in terms of what does that mean, right? What is the interpretation of badass? And so you saw stores, you had 18 different stores that had 18 different interpretations of what the brand was, what the menu was, how the stores looked, which merchandise they carried. And so part of it was really more of a leadership position. And we lead with, our 3 brand pillars are about our Hawaiian heritage, leaning into aloha, spirit of aloha, into family, ohana. That's a big part of our brand, leaning into our expertise in Hawaiian coffee, as well as other international coffees that we use. And then 3, leaning into, using coffee as a fuel to fuel your inner badass, right? Which is deep down, we're all a little stubborn. We're all pretty strong. We're all pretty determined to make things happen in the world and do good in the world. And that's what the asses did, back in the day, right? And so a true badass isn't somebody who promotes themselves, isn't someone who's necessarily wearing leather and chains and riding a Harley. It's more about just kind of doing badass things. And if you start to listen to it, you hear it everywhere in popular culture. We talked about Ruth Gingrich being a badass. We talk about this person who saved someone who did, was a good Samaritan there. That was pretty badass, right? I mean, you hear it every day. And we think if you're back to being the ultimate habit brand, if you've chosen Badass Coffee as a place that relates for you because it makes you feel a certain way, or you like being welcomed, or you just like that vibe, that's pretty badass too, right? You've made a decision to kind of break away from the everyday and to find a place that you feel comfortable in and you call home. And really, that's what Aloha is all about, right? Being kind, being generous, giving back to the community, being accepting, empathy, right? All those things. That's very Hawaiian too. And so we've embraced the using coffee as a fuel and fueling your inner badass. And we'll never tell you what it means. It's really up for you to determine what kind of badass you are and what's badass to you. But it all goes back to those donkeys and their reliably strong nature of creating this opportunity that we all have today.
Well, I got to tell you, Scott, this is the first time on the podcast I've had a branding conversation that brought up the King James Bible. But it is really silly to think that like badass it might be taboo. In that I even was stifling my giggles as you said it. But here we are in a society. So no, I totally get everything you just said. But that does bring us to kind of the main point of why I really wanted to talk to you is because of the way you guys have stood up this new revenue stream, which is your merchandise. And you mentioned that merchandise before. Tell me about that merchandise line, because I imagine having a brand such as Badass Coffee of Hawaii, where your logo is a donkey, I mean, it sort of just lends itself to t-shirts. I mean, you're wearing the shirt right now. Like there's something about that just resonates as something that is a wearable. But where did the merchandise line, what's sort of the origin story of when you guys kind of realized like this was something that we could really invest in?
Again, I we can't take full credit for that. I think we'll take credit for taking it to the next level. But the prior ownership did recognize the opportunity. In fact, the ownership group, the BJ Belanzich, her story in 1995 was that they went to the original store in Kona, and they were part of a big group, and they stumbled across Badass Coffee just down the road from Greenwell Farms, and she bought a purple hat with the old logo on it. The old logo looked a little bit like Eeyore. The donkey looked a little sad. but anyway, they stepped on the plane, and the story goes that her husband Michael Blanzich said, I bet we could have sold 100 more of those hats on the spot. Everyone wanted to know, where'd you get the hat? And again, this kind of goes to the conversation we just had. I think there's something appealing about that. There's something a little bit disruptive about that. But they recognize that. And so when they bought the brand in 1995 and began to franchise, you could call this brand kind of the Hard Rock Cafe of the coffee world. It was all about the name drop. So Badass Coffee of Hawaii, Miramar Beach, Florida. Badass Coffee of Hawaii, Lahaina, and so really it kind of started there. I would say we've taken it to the next level, and again, kudos to Tim Gervin and his team. We probably went through 30 different versions of the donkey before we got with this one. He's winking, right? Donkeys are smart. They're really funny. There's kind of a wink of fun there, and it really has taken off from there. So recognizing that all coffee shops, and you can find different statistics, but kind of nationally, I'm going to say most coffee shops are doing somewhere between 1.5% to 3% merchandise in their stores, and that's generally whole beans and retail coffee, maybe some mugs, maybe some travel mugs, things like that. The average Badass Coffee store between retail coffee and merchandise is doing between 10 and 15%. And our stores that are in our destination locations, right, they're doing between 25 and 35% of their revenue is coming from merchandise. A couple great things about that. It number one, certainly increases our average check or average transaction. That helps that. But it also helps to lower labor as a percentage of revenue, right? The coffee shop business is pretty labor intensive, whether you're assembling sandwiches or heating sandwiches or taking that latte from order down the line. You may be looking at 3 to 4.5 minutes to get that order out. It takes all of 20 seconds to ring up a hat and a t-shirt. So it does become an integral part of our business model. While it may have more the lower end of margin opportunity for the franchise, it certainly contributes in terms of sales, contributes to average check, and contributes to lowering the cost of labor. So we've taken that to the next level. We think that the donkey himself, Jack, has an opportunity to stand alone. We could see, long term, we could see this brand expanding into more apparel as a standalone. We're not, you can put a logo on anything, right? It doesn't mean that you should, right? So you need to be thoughtful about that. And so again, we spend a lot of time thinking about the value of the brand in the store, tying that to the location. That's part of the consumer experience. I got this shirt on my great trip to the Badass Coffee store in Virginia Beach, right? And it says right there, Virginia Beach. So that is a big piece of this too, right? Linking experiences to the brand. It's one of the things that really impressed me when I came in as a consultant. The brand only had 20 locations when I came in as a consultant, but the brand recall value that I researched was more indicative of a brand with 150 to 200 stores. And you would hear consumers talk about that to say, oh my gosh, I know that brand. We went on vacation 5 years ago to Grayton Beach, and we went to your store every day. Or my wife and I got married and had our honeymoon in Maui 20 years ago, and we went to bed. I mean, it all comes back. And so I think the merchandise is as much a part of the about that experience that we talked about earlier, as the coffee and as the food and the experience in the store itself. So it's got to be thoughtful. You can't just slap a logo on things. It's got to be useful. It has to be meaningful. And then where do you take it from there, I think is really the next step in this journey. But it is absolutely a differentiator from a business model standpoint, over any other coffee shop model, franchise or corporate or independent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a picture of your merchandise section right now, and it's extensive. I mean, you guys have put a lot of thought into this, and you've really gone all into this. And to your point, you can't just slap a logo on something. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking of, it's been a few days now, but Jimmy Buffett just passed, and so I think of Margaritaville. We're getting ready to host an event at Margaritaville, and Margaritaville is very associated with identity. So
Mm-hmm.
when people who pronounce to be, it's parrot heads, I believe, are Jimmy Buffett fans,
Yeah,
and they go to Margaritaville, like it says something about their identity.
it
You
does.
mentioned Hard Rock Cafe. That's rooted in place. Which brings me back to, I guess, to my question around, as you invest in your merchandise line, how much do you need to know your customer base to really understand how to sort of pull those identity strings with them so that they, to your point, they're going to want to buy this thing. They're not going to see it as some kitschy novelty. They're going to see something and go, that's me. That's my identity. I need to have that.
Absolutely, and I think we're relatively new into this, right? We're launching the brand in the spring of 2020. Here we are in the summer of 23. We're still learning, honestly, as we grow more and more stores that are coastal, stores that are inland. We are learning more and more about what is that profile, that unique profile, and I think one of the things that's really interesting, Sam, about this brand is. In my years of working with other brands, you generally find where their target customer is on the spectrum, right? Maybe it's a value to luxury in the spectrum, and you pick where they are, where their sweet spot is, and you kind of, your strategy is, I'm going to take them down towards a value play, or I'm going to take them up towards a luxury, whatever the strategy is. Badass Coffee has such an interesting audience because on one hand, you do have a younger audience that says, I'm done with this brand, or I'm done with that brand, and boy, this is my brand. And maybe they're not even coffee drinkers at that point. They're drinking lemonades, and they're drinking, other things. But at the other end of our spectrum, we have a very loyal and long-standing customer base that's been buying the most expensive 100% Hawaiian coffees from us for 33 years. And so we really have an opportunity to create a lifetime journey with the customer. And so we're still gathering information. We're still looking at the data. We're still trying to put a little bit more of a finished definition of what that customer type is. But to your point, we absolutely align ourselves with brands like Margaritaville. I wish that we were the coffee in Margaritaville hotels. I would love to have that opportunity because we think that there are a lot of parallels there in terms of life by the water's edge or life on the water. And I just think we admire brands like Margaritaville. We admire the brands like Hard Rock Cafe and what they are and what they were. Other brands like that, the people do identify themselves with, and we think that Badass Coffee has that opportunity because it's not all just about coffee. It's about lifestyle. It's about how you treat people. It's about sharing aloha and treating people like family, and who doesn't want to be a part of Hawaii,
Well, and to that end, I mean, it does all ultimately come back to place in a way, which is Margaritaville is a vibe, but it's a place, which is the tropics.
Yeah.
And Hard Rock Cafe, you wanted to collect the shirts with the city on the Hard Rock Cafe. That it
Yeah.
was a place, not necessarily the brand itself. So you guys sort of have it baked in with Hawaii being very rooted in who you are as a brand. I want to get into sort of your call it omni-channel revenue strategy. And you're the second person I've spoken to recently with this kind of triplet, revenue stream model. The other person being Stacy Peterson of Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams, and very similarly, Jenny's has they have their scoop shops, they have a retail CPG. and they have a direct to consumer business. You guys, similarly, you have your coffee shops, you have your retail beans, and then you have your merchandise. And so I'm curious about this because when you say omni-channel, or when I say omni-channel, usually you're referencing drive-through, delivery, curbside. But in this case, it's a little bit different. You guys have a little bit of a different business model afforded to you because of sort of the nature of coffee, the fact that you can sell beans, but then also, again, this great merchandise opportunity you have. Which brings me to my question, which is, how do you invest in these three revenue streams sort of together and separately to deliver the badass coffee brand to new and old customers? How do these things kind of work in concert with each other?
I think the way to answer that question is there's really two ways to look at that, Sam. I think within the store, we just talked about that, right? The sales mix, right? We look at different models by their sales mix. If you're in a destination area, a large part of your business is going to be driven by the merchandise sales. If you are more of that drive-through model, you're going to, a large part of the largest part of your sales mix is going to be driven by beverage, and very little of it's going to be about merchandise. But I think as a business structure, which I think is where the basis of your question was, we had both a challenge and an opportunity with this brand. We took it over, like I said earlier, in my research, my initial data research, I saw great brand awareness of this brand, even though there were, at the time we finally did the acquisition, there were about 18 stores, and we lost a few shortly thereafter with COVID. So we were down in the mid to low teens. And I think the challenge was, how do you leverage people's familiarity? How do you introduce new people to the brand? And it was a very intentional marketing strategy designed ultimately to drive customers into the stores and create demand for stores. And so using social, using the small online store that we acquired, we really used social to create buzz around the brand, to introduce the brand to a younger generation, to reintroduce the brand to existing prior customers and people who had experienced the brand, and really spin that up in a way to where it was fun, it was lighthearted, it was, tongue in cheek, it was, but at the same time, really establishing, again, the ties to Hawaii, the ties to the premium, super premium quality beans, and having a lot of fun with the donkey, right? What that did was that began to grow. That base began to grow, and what you create is buzz and conversation about a brand that most of the people that are doing the conversation has never experienced before. That buzz around the conversation created demand for product, right? And when you only had, 16, 18 stores at that time, where do you buy that product? That created the opportunity for that e-commerce platform to bring the product, put the product in the hands of the person. What's all this buzz? It seems really fun. Oh, I want one of those hats. I'll try some coffee, right? And so to create that buzz and create the demand for product, once the product was there, now you've converted enthusiasts into advocates. Oh my gosh, this is the best coffee I've ever had. I'm the first one in my neighborhood to have this hat. Now everybody wants that hat. Guess what? I'm buying everyone for Christmas this year. I'm going to buy you a gift basket with a mug and a hat and a bag of coffee. So you've created demand for the product, and you get enough of that product out. That product demand then converts into, oh my gosh, you have stores. When are you going to build a store in my neighborhood? And that's where you move back into the franchise world to say, now we have not only a base, we've seeded a geographic area with known e-commerce customers, but I can show you socially where those conversations switch from, isn't this great, to, oh my gosh, I have to have some of that, to, oh my gosh, when are you going to build one of these in my neighborhood? And that creates the opportunity to sell franchises, to build stores, to open stores in markets where the brand is already known, and you have a baseline customer base already there. And ultimately, that is our goal. We want to make sure that we are a franchise first organization. Make no mistake about it. Every decision that we've made, and when you have to rebuild a brand from scratch and rebuild an infrastructure from scratch, the way that we would prioritize the priorities is which one of these decisions is going to impact franchisees in the most favorable way first. And so this whole marketing strategy has been designed to create demand for stores and to build a base of customers that will populate that store and support that store from day one. The stores that we're opening right now are the beneficiaries of that.
Kind of makes me think of loyalty. I mean, I know when you talk about loyalty, usually you're talking about something else. You're talking about sort of, these days it's certainly technology, apps, rewards, points. But it almost seems to me like when you talk about that baseline of customers, it's almost like your VIP, right? Like in some ways, this is a deeper loyalty because if you get somebody who wants to wear your hat, wear your T-shirt, buy your mug, there's value to that loyal customer. Is that what you're seeking?
We are. They're brand advocates. They're walking billboards, right? It's a conversation generator, and that's really, Sam, where we go back to you use the word provocative, right? In terms of the logo and the name. It just, there's something about this logo. There's something about that donkey, and he's front and center, right? That generates that. Oh, that's really cool, and it creates conversation. So I think we're blessed, truly blessed, that our customers are so passionate about the product. They are loyal. It is a loyalty thing, but it's also, like I said, as you said earlier, with Margaritaville, it's almost an identifier. It's who I am. I've made a conscious decision that this is a brand that represents what I'm all about, and I don't need to say it. I'm a bit of a badass. You wouldn't suspect it, but deep down, I'm a bit of a badass, and I'm not, not only not afraid to wear this, I'm proud to wear this because I'm different, and I'm proud of that.
Well, that's good stuff. Scott Snyder, the CEO of Badass Coffee of Hawaii. Scott, appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it.
That was my interview with Scott Snyder, the CEO of Badass Coffee of Hawaii. So what should you learn from this interview? Here are my 6 takeaways. My first takeaway is that the experience your restaurant provides should be authentic to your brand. Scott explained how there are kind of two versions of coffee shops in the world. He explained that, there's the one version that's kind of dark wood, cozy, darkly lit. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have this sort of stainless steel, bright, sterile kind of environments. Of course, there's a lot of nuance between those two, but he wanted Badass Coffee to be not either one of those sides. He wanted it to be authentic to the brand. And so for Badass Coffee, they have touches of Hawaii throughout their restaurants, and they look totally different from other coffee shops. He explained that they've got vintage photos of surfers and Hawaiian culture. They have a lot of colors that kind of bring the culture of Hawaii to life. Scott explained shouldn't just follow, the trend or expectation of what the coffee shop is, but rather stay authentic to your brand in your shop design and root it in what you can see about the brand as much as what you can taste. And, even in the what you can hear in the restaurant, I loved how he talked about how employees say aloha to guests who come in. What is the guest seeing and hearing? That's as important to the experience of a brand as what you're tasting in the menu. My second takeaway is that there is value in your brand's ownable truths. That was a phrase Scott used that I really appreciated. For Badass Coffee, it's Hawaii. There is just everything about this brand is rooted in Hawaii, from the product to the experience to the vibe that they're trying to create. And they're really investing in that. They wanted to have a rich sense of place that they could build this brand around. Scott explained that they wanted Badass Coffee to be evoking a place that you want to be. A lot of us have never been to Hawaii. I've never had the fortune of going to Hawaii. And chances are, if you're listening to this, maybe you've only visited Hawaii. You've never actually lived there. And for those of us who dream of going to Hawaii and experiencing that, that's what Badass Coffee is really trying to, again, evoke and create through their brand. So they've discovered that ownable truth about the brand, which was Hawaii, and they are really imbuing that into every element of the brand. My third takeaway is that you should have a consistent interpretation of your brand. When Scott and his group took over in 2019, there were 18 shops. And as he explained it, every shop kind of had a different interpretation of what Badass Coffee stood for. So the past 4 years, they've really been doing a lot of work around making one consistent branding experience across all what is now 32 shops. I think it's really important for something like Badass Coffee. When I first heard the name of this brand, I was like, oh, wow, that's a very evocative name. I could see how some people might even find it offensive. But Scott does such a wonderful job really explaining, what does badass mean? That is a donkey. That goes back into Hawaiian culture and history. And if the brand did not try to consistently explain and evoke that branding across its shops, it would leave each store owner and certainly each customer to interpret it for themselves. And for some people, maybe that wouldn't be a positive interpretation. The point is whatever that brand is that you've invested in, whatever you're trying to evoke from your customers through your branding, make it consistent across the shops and help them interpret it so they're not interpreting it for themselves, specifically in a negative way. My fourth takeaway is that merchandise is an underrated way to drive sales without increasing labor. This was really why I wanted to talk to Scott, but I'm really impressed by the merchandise channel that they have built. And I've seen photos of this thing. We'll try to throw a photo up on the website for you to see as well. But their merchandise section it's big. It's not just a couple of hats and shirts at the point of sale. It's a whole area of the restaurant designated to their merchandise. And as Scott explains it, the merchandise helps to lower labor as a percentage of revenue, because it is very easy to ring up merchandise at the point of sale, much easier certainly than making a latte. And so that merchandise has become a really key way for them to drive sales. Really incredible. He said it's 10 to 15% of their sales, and can be even higher at some of their locations that are more destinations. It's more of an effective strategy in those places that are destinations. And it's just worth thinking about that merchandise can represent a solid chunk of your sales without any increase to your labor. But of course, it's a little bit more difficult than that. And that leads me to my fifth takeaway, which is that merch can help you link experiences to the brand. So this is the important part that, again, I don't think you can just slap your logo on a t-shirt and hat and call it a day and hope you're going to get 10 to 15% of your sales. Rather, you have to lean into that merchandise and that retail to evoke the experience you're trying to create and to be linked to the experience you hope your customers have. Scott said something really incredible, which was that the brand recall among customers for Badass Coffee is similar to that of a major chain with more than 1,000 locations. And the reason why people remember this brand and they remember the experience they're having at Badass Coffee is that, maybe they got the shirt with the city under the logo where they bought that shirt, or they got the hat and people ask them about that hat because it's a winking donkey that says Badass Coffee. There is an experience to the merchandise they're selling. And especially, again, he mentioned in some of those areas where Badass Coffee is located that are more destinations, a customer might be there on vacation, having a great experience. Badass Coffee becomes a part of that experience. They bring home the t-shirt, and those are inextricably linked. The positive experience they're having is then linked to the brand, and they even take home the hat and the mug to remember that by. All of this brings me back around to, if you're going to have merchandise or retail for your own brand, don't just throw it out there for people to have. Think of how you can connect the experience your customers are having to the merchandise that you're selling. I really do appreciate this bit about how they put the city name under the logo on that shirt for wherever the customer has purchased that shirt, whichever Badass Coffee they've purchased that shirt, because it reminds me of Hard Rock Cafe. We brought this up in our conversation, Hard Rock Cafe, Margaritaville. For myself, as a kid, I remember going to Hard Rock Cafe on family vacations. I remember going to one in Myrtle Beach. We even went to one, I remember, in Paris. And we got those shirts that said Hard Rock Cafe Paris, Hard Rock Cafe Myrtle Beach. You probably can picture these shirts even as I'm saying this, because a brand like Hard Rock Cafe, Planet Hollywood, Margaritaville, these are all really rooted in the places that they decide to open. And again, they become a part of the experience that the customer is having in a very unique way. This isn't for everybody. Certainly, McDonald's, Wendy's are never going to say, "Oh, hey, here's the name of the Wendy's that you went to." It's a little bit of a different ball game. But I'd guess that there's a number of you out there who might have a brand that this could be a good fit for, where you can bake your merchandise into the experience that the customers are having in that location. And again, sort of making those two things go on into the future hand in hand in a very positive way. My sixth and final takeaway is that an e-commerce strategy can help drive customers to your stores from day one. This is, again, not for everybody, but I'm seeing this more and more from coffee brands, treat brands, snack brands. If you're able to build out a retail line or an e-commerce strategy to where you can ship your product, consider that you can really build that into a community even before you open your stores. So if you are, for example, planning to open in, let's just say, Minneapolis for the very first time, how can you hit Minneapolis with your retail, your e-commerce strategy ahead of open, so that by the time you open your doors, customers in the area are familiar with your product because they've had it shipped to them. They're already familiar with your brand. And so now when you open your doors, they're lined up and ready to go. Again, that's not for everybody and not for every category in the restaurant industry, but I'd wager another guess that there are some of you out there who your product is well designed for e-commerce, for shipping that product, and you can really tap into that strategically to get into a market before you have brick and mortar there. Those are all my takeaways for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe to Takeaway wherever you listen to podcasts and leave your feedback. You can also email me at sam.oches@informa.com. Thanks again, and talk to you next week.